Well, coming up, we'll get the full reaction to the President's announcement. That will be over the coming hour. But it is worth reading what is now an historic statement in full. And here it is. It came in the form of a letter addressed to my fellow Americans. And it says, over the past 3.5 years, we've made great progress as a nation. Today, America has the strongest economy in the world. We've made historic investments in rebuilding our nation, in lowering prescription drug costs for seniors and expanding affordable health care to a record number of Americans. We've provided critically needed care to 1 million veterans exposed to toxic substances, passed the first gun safety law in 30 years, appointed the first African-American woman to the Supreme Court, and passed the most significant climate legislation in the history of the world. America has never been better positioned to lead than we are today. I know none of this could have been done without you, the American people. Together we overcame a once-in-a-century pandemic and the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. We've protected and preserved our democracy, and we've revitalized and strengthened our alliances around the world. And then the crucial paragraph. It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president, and while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interests of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. He goes on to say, I will speak to the nation later in the coming week. He'll speak in more detail about that decision. He goes on, for now, let me express my deepest gratitude to all those who have worked so hard to see me re-elected. I want to thank Vice President Kamala Harris for being an extraordinary partner in all this work, and let me express my heartfelt appreciation to the American people for the faith and trust you have placed in me. He says, I believe today what I always have, that there is nothing America cannot do when we do it together. We just have to remember we are the United States of America. And he also then tweeted separately and endorsed Kamala Harris as the next candidate. First tonight, here's our US correspondent, James Matthews.
How do you feel?
This was the last day we saw Joe Biden in public. A faltering figure, facing increasing questions about his fitness for office. He cut short a campaign trip to Nevada on Wednesday, following a COVID diagnosis. It now transpires this was a president leaving the presidential race. From the seclusion of his weekend beach house here in Rehoboth Beach, he's posted a letter on X. It states, while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it's in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term.
Joe Biden.
It was a TV debate with Donald Trump that prompted his demise.
Dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if...
A stumbling performance caused fear amongst Democrats that his frailty would cost them the election.
And a bad night.
Defiantly, Joe Biden resisted increasing calls for him to step down.
He just had a really bad cold.
But as he continued campaigning, senior Democratic figures warned him he would likely lose the White House to Donald Trump, and the party could lose the Senate and House of Representatives with it. In pulling out of the race, Joe Biden has endorsed the woman he chose as vice president. Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. has been America's 46th and oldest president.
What is the message we send to the world if we stand by and we say, we'll let it continue to happen here in this place?
A voice at the heart of U.S. politics for 5 decades, a face familiar to Americans for so many years. His journey to Washington began here, 2446 North Washington Avenue, Scranton, Pennsylvania. A modest upbringing that he'd cling to, Scranton Joe. It was the working-class man of the people image he used to propel himself upwards.
Hi, how are you?
Hi,
Joe
how are
Biden's
you?
my name.
It would be quick at the start, elected to the Senate in Washington, aged just 30.
Joe Biden! Joe Biden! Joe Biden!
But the rise would then be slow, nearly 4 decades, and 2 failed presidential bids to reach that highest office. Biden's departure complicates the Democrat succession with November in mind. Not to mention the 5 months left in the White House with business unfinished, not least in the Middle East. For all Biden wants an exit untarnished, the timing and circumstances jeopardize the legacy of a lame duck president. James Matthews, Sky News in Washington.
And James joins me live now. First of all, it is a historic moment, a serving president being forced to quit a future race.
Yeah, end of an era, Mark. I mean, Joe Biden is one of America's oldest politicians. He is a firm part of the political establishment here. Senator, a man who ran for president in the past, was vice president, of course, through many years, a very active vice president on foreign policy, known around the world, domestically very important. While he was in the number 2 job, Barack Obama lent very heavily on him. Famously, he ran in 2020 on the back of the riots of white supremacists, styled himself as the one man who could beat Donald Trump and won power. He was the stability candidate, a bridge back to a more traditional style, a more calm style of politics in the United States after the turbulence of the Trump years. So he has been front and center of the American and world consciousness in the political landscape. And of course, latterly, this chapter has been almost a Shakespearean tragedy. There have long been questions about Joe Biden's age and ability to do the job, his suitability for office. That came to a head, of course, in that debate. He tried to cling on, and ultimately the forces within his party made him take that jump.
Yeah, probably inevitable. What has struck you about the reaction that we've had so far?
I think the reaction is entirely predictable. It will stick in Joe Biden's throat because over the past couple of weeks, while he insists the polls were in his favor, he was the one man to beat Donald Trump, circling around him have been senior figures within the party, icons. Barack Obama staying silent but not putting a stop to those urging Biden to step down. We've had Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, all the power brokers. Nancy Pelosi, icon within the party, an old friend, confronting him with the hard reality that he couldn't beat Donald Trump. We have a statement from Kamala Harris, significant clearly on a day like today and moving forward. I'll read it to you, Mark. This is the woman who would be president or who will take over as candidate if she has her way and if Biden has her way. She says this: "I'm honored to have the president's endorsement and my intention is to earn and win this nomination. Over the past year, I have traveled across the country talking with Americans about the clear choice in this momentous election. That is what I will continue to do in the days and weeks ahead. I will do everything in my power to unite the Democratic Party and unite our nation to defeat Donald Trump and his extreme Project 2025 agenda." The key line in that, Mark, I think, is when she says, "It's my intention to earn and win this nomination."
Yes.
What does that mean? We will find out moving forward. Does that mean there will be some kind of mini primary before the Democratic convention or an open contest?
Well, we've already had a significant donor to the Democrat Party on this program this evening saying there has to be a contest, there has to be an open contest, and that it will be good for the Democratic Party.
Yeah, because that's democracy within the party. And remember, this is a party fighting, as they would style it, to save the existential threat to democracy. So if there is no contest, if there is no argument, and a decision that is seen to be in the democratic interest of the party, then that puts them on the back foot come November and the arguments prior to the election. The counter-argument to that would be, and I've heard this from Democrats, even those who wanted Joe Biden out, some of them have said to me, look, we're quite happy with Kamala Harris, and this Democratic argument doesn't quite hold, because when we backed Biden through the primary process, we were backing Harris as well. So to that extent, she has that momentum moving forward.
And an interesting point in all this is how the Republicans will feel about this and who they would prefer to be up against.
I think there's a simple answer to that. It's They would prefer to be up against Joe Biden.
Yeah.
They've been desperate for him to stay in place.
So
That's
does this
what
throw them into a degree? I mean, we've had Democrats on tonight saying they'll be in panic. I mean, but it does. It's an upheaval to their strategy, isn't it?
It's an upheaval. I mean, the Republicans, they have been preparing their attack lines for this very moment, and their chief attack line, of course, will centre on Joe Biden himself. They will say, well, hang on, you've got this candidate who's stepping down because he doesn't have the mental sharpness to be a candidate. Are you now telling us that he has the mental sharpness to remain in office for 5 months when the world is on fire? There's trouble in Ukraine, there's trouble in the Middle East. You've got this lame duck president, unfit for office, and now in a situation where it's actually the responsibility of somebody else.
But also, and his vice president, they will say, is linked to all the failings that they are already sort of, talking about the Biden presidency.
Yeah, they will seek to tarnish Harris with the same brush. I think the interesting thing with Harris, the more Democrats would say that the more she is framed as a presidential candidate, the more the electorate at large will see her that way. It will change their perception of her suitability for the job, improve her approval ratings, which, of course, are through the floor, albeit she's closer to Trump than Joe Biden is. I think her difficulty will be is that she's not been tested under that kind of scrutiny. When Trump et al. Begin turning their fire on Kamala Harris, we'll have to see how she stands up to that kind of forum, debate and so on, because she didn't do well in the contest to be the Democratic nominee back in 2020.
And in historic terms, I mean, this does not happen very often, does it? What's happened to Joe Biden?
Which is why it is a matter of extreme significance and extreme concern for the Democratic Party moving forward. I mean, we are at a situation, having just been to the Republican National Convention, where politics has turned on its head. Yeah. When you look at the primetime address of the man who would be president, and the polls say he will be in November, introduced by Hulk Hogan, ex-entertainer and wrestler, preacher, you have people with their hands in the air on the back, praying. It was almost a religious experience. You have that on the one hand. On the other hand, you have an 81-year-old president deemed to be too frail, unfit for office. We've never seen the like in American politics.
And it was just 8 days ago you had this attempted assassination of a presidential candidate, a former president, Trump. And now you have this. This is some week in American politics.
Some week, a turning point in American politics. And the story is not over. I mean, it is all about Kamala Harris. That's where the story goes now. And whether or not she can unite the Democratic Party, carry them forward as a party united, and whether or not she can, she is somebody of suitable stature and political clout to win the arguments come November. It will be interesting. You speak to the Democrats, what they like about Kamala Harris is her background. She has a legal background, former prosecutor. They say that will score high when it comes to the TV debate stage. For example, Donald Trump, an individual who is a convicted felon, and just that whole, as they would have it, light touch and loose connection to politics, to concrete politics for Donald Trump. Right. They think Kamala Harris can score big on that, but also her youth, the fact that she is a history maker herself, the first woman of colour to be in that position, to run for the top job, and she will carry behind her, or the belief within Democrats, the Democratic ranks, is that she will carry behind her, the same way that Biden did, the coalition that she will need to pull together the numbers.
James, stay with me, because there's a lot to talk about what happens going forward. And as we've been discussing, attention will now turn to who the Democrat candidate to face Donald Trump will actually be. Mr. Biden has endorsed his vice president, as we've been talking about, Kamala Harris, as has former President Bill Clinton and also the former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. So, who is the woman who could now be the first female president, and will she face any challenge to be Mr. Biden's replacement? Here's our US correspondent, Martha Kellner.
We did it. We did it, Joe.
It was the viral video which confirmed the Biden-Harris ticket was heading for the White House. 4 years on, President Biden is now lining up behind his running mate, backing 59-year-old Harris to become America's first female president.
We beat Donald Trump once, and we're going to beat him again.
Well, we've never invested in campaign with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket. So I'm excited to see, and I know the money is going to be ramping up because I'm already hearing from donors who had been waiting on the sidelines, but they're ready to come back in.
Harris had led her own presidential campaign in 2020.
I am running for president of the United States.
Well,
and,
that's a big announcement.
and I'm very excited about it.
It was short-lived, but enough to convince Biden to pick her as his running mate. It was this grilling of Brett Kavanaugh, a Trump appointee to the Supreme Court.
Yes or no?
Well, is there a person you're talking about?
I'm asking you a very direct question, yes or no?
That propelled Harris, then a senator, into the national spotlight. She was, supporters said, forensic, ferocious, and a breath of fresh air. Her upbringing had always marked her out. The daughter of an Indian mother and a Jamaican father, she was a long-standing glass ceiling smasher. In her home state of California, Harris became the first black person to serve as Attorney General. Then the big one, America's first female vice president. But in office, some, even in her own party, have viewed her as a political liability, unable to assert herself or her policies.
And there is a direct nexus between where we are on this subject and elections.
But abortion and the overturning of the constitutional right to choose has given Harris a golden political opportunity. If she becomes the presidential nominee, it could help her win votes in key constituencies. Others in the Democratic Party, though, favour an open nominating process. California Governor Gavin Newsom is a name on some shortlists. And Gretchen Whitmer, the Governor of Michigan, could appeal to swing voters in blue wall states. For now, though, Harris seems to be the most likely pick. She would have among the toughest and certainly the shortest presidential campaigns ahead. Martha Kellner, Sky News.
Let's join our correspondent David Blevins, who is at the White House this evening. And David, first of all, this will have been a very difficult decision for Joe Biden to have taken.
Yes, effectively signalling the end of half a century of service in American politics. But just the latest of 8 days, it has to be said, that have completely redefined the race for the White House. I think the announcement this afternoon has swollen the number of tourists on Pennsylvania Avenue, clearly keen for a selfie with the White House behind them at such a momentous moment. And that week that changed America began with the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, rising bloodstained from the platform, imploring his followers to fight, fight, fight. At his first campaign rally since the shooting last night, he told them he had taken a bullet for democracy, and then went on to mock the disarray among the Democrats. He said they don't know who their candidate is, we don't know who their candidate is, and that's a problem. And against their celebration of his survival at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, we had Joe Biden isolated politically here in Washington by nearly 40 Democratic members of Congress, expressing concern about his health and publicly calling for him to go, and isolated physically by COVID in his beach house in Delaware with the First Lady Jill Biden, where at 1:45 Eastern Time today, that's 6:45 p.m. in the UK, he informed his advisors that he had taken the decision to step down. He'd spoken previously with Kamala Harris, the Vice President, and I suppose that now shifts the focus to her, because Kamala Harris is front runner, it would seem, to be on the ticket for the Democrats in November. She has the endorsement of the President, Joe Biden. She has the endorsement of a former President, Bill Clinton, but she does not yet have the endorsement of former President Barack Obama or former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, other significant figures within the Democratic Party. So we are coming to the end, I think, of 8 tumultuous days in US politics. and we're still 4 months from the election. The one thing we can say is that the race for the White House is never dull.
That's absolutely right, David. Just on the sort of logistics of Joe Biden, he's in Delaware, I understand. I'm not sure when he's going to come back to the White House, but he's going to stay on. Let's be clear about this. He's staying on as president for, well, until effectively till January.
Yes, I think we're guessing at the moment that he will return here to Washington early in the week. He says he will address the nation at some point. We know he's scheduled to meet with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and that meeting is going ahead. But we don't know an awful lot beyond that, apart from the fact that he is determined now to protect his legacy by finishing his presidency well, which is what many senior Democrats were calling upon him to do. But that will raise many questions. Even before this announcement today, Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, had already expressed his view that if Joe Biden bowed out of the election, he needed to bow out of the White House altogether. Because in his opinion, he said if Joe Biden isn't fit to run for another 4 years, he isn't fit to govern for another 4 months. And I think that is a question that will linger for many people, because the United States really has been dealing with an incredible amount of political drama in recent days, and it's not over yet.
David, thanks very much indeed. Let's cross straight to the west coast of the United States now to speak to our US correspondent Martha Kellner, who is in Los Angeles. And Martha, clearly a lot of attention now on Kamala Harris, but the way the Democrats handle all this going forward becomes very important now.
Yeah, we could be on the brink, Mark, of a historic moment, of course, potentially a run for America's first female president. Now, logistically, Kamala Harris makes a lot of sense for the Democratic Party. She's already surrounded by the Biden-Harris infrastructure. She could inherit immediately that donation money from the Biden-Harris campaign. President Biden could instruct his delegates to vote for Kamala Harris. So logistically, she makes a lot of sense. But I was speaking to a Republican strategist just last week, of course, at the Republican National Convention, when clearly there were a lot of questions already about President Biden's political future. And he was saying, remember, within great vast parts of America, Kamala Harris will be viewed as interchangeable with President Biden. She is number 2 in an administration which has very, very low polling numbers, is lagging behind Donald Trump on almost all metrics. She's also the border czar at a time when America has a major immigration crisis. So she's not necessarily the perfect candidate, but it comes back to what President Biden always says, which is judge me against the alternative and not the almighty. And he clearly thinks that she has enough to prevail over Donald Trump. So I think she is now clearly the most obvious frontrunner for the Democratic Party's nomination. And I think now attention will turn to who Kamala Harris may pick for her running mate. I think it is likely, if she does get the nomination, to be a governor, perhaps someone like Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, Andy Beshear, who's very popular in Kentucky, perhaps even Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. How historic would that be, potentially having 2 women on a presidential ticket? But of course, there are lots of questions, lots to work out for the Democratic Party in the coming days.
Yeah, and in terms of her weaknesses, are there concerns within the Democratic Party about the last time she ran, which was for president, in which the campaign did not go at all well, and she was forced out of that campaign, or she withdrew from that campaign very early? Are there concerns about how she will go down with the voters?
Yeah, there's concerns that she's not a particularly good politician, Mark. She rose to prominence, as I was saying in my piece there, with that grilling of the Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh at the time she was running for Senate. She then took a brief run for the presidency herself. It was a very short-lived campaign back in 2020. And up until sort of 6 months ago, she was viewed, even by some within her own party, as being a major political liability. She's failed to assert herself, particularly on the immigration. Some people are saying that President Biden sold her down the river somewhat with some very tough political briefs, but she's not seen as having flown in this role as Vice President. One brief bright spot for Kamala Harris has been the overturning of Roe versus Wade, the overturning of the constitutional right to choose. She's really seen abortion as something that she can campaign on. She's been doing this tour crisscrossing the United States, specifically appealing for people to vote on the issue of abortion. And that's being viewed as having been quite effective. Abortion was something that brought particularly women to the polls in vast numbers in the 2022 midterm election. So I think that's something, if she becomes the presidential nominee, that she will really focus on. That is an issue that she believes she can win votes in key swing states on.
And just finally, Martha, in the key swing states that you've been talking about, or we've been talking about, Trump does seem to have momentum. We were in Pennsylvania just earlier last week for 2 or 3 days in a county called Bucks County, which the Democrats have been winning. But it is really 50-50. And the people we spoke to said the momentum seems to be with the Republicans, seems to be with Donald Trump. I just wonder how worried the Democrats are about finding any candidate who could close the gap on Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think that is the problem, Mark. There is no obvious perfect candidate. In fact, there's no one really who you look at and think they could do vastly better than Kamala Harris in the current political landscape. You were mentioning the polling there in those swing states, and I think the problem was after that debate 3 weeks ago with President Biden, Americans couldn't unsee or unhear what they'd seen and heard from President Biden. And it means that we saw this sudden surge in momentum for Donald Trump and the Republican Party. Those latest polling numbers showing Donald Trump leading President Biden, as it was at the time, in 7 key swing states. So there is a huge political mountain to climb for Kamala Harris. But I think some within the Democratic Party are looking at her and thinking perhaps she offers opportunities, appealing to black voters, which is a key constituency, voters of colour, and appealing to women as well, as I was mentioning before, on abortion, that perhaps she does give them an edge over President Biden in some of those swing states on those issues.
Martha, thank you very much indeed. Martha Kellner over there on the west coast of the United States on a momentous day in American politics. Let's just have a look at some of the reaction to this decision by Joe Biden to step down from the presidential race. And let's begin with Donald Trump, who has said on his Truth Social website, "Crooked Joe Biden was not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve and never was. He only attained the position of president by lies, fake news, and not leaving his basement." He goes on, "All those around him, including his doctor and the media, knew that he wasn't capable of being president, and he wasn't. And now look what he's done to our country with millions of people coming across our border, totally unchecked and unvetted, many from prisons, mental institutions, and record numbers of terrorists." He goes on, "We will suffer greatly because of his presidency, but we will remedy the damage he has done very quickly." And he ends with capital letters, "Make America Great Again." Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, said on X, which used to be Twitter, "Joe Biden has been the worst president in my lifetime, and Kamala Harris has been right there with him every step of the way." Over the last 4 years, she co-signed Biden's open border and green scam policies that drove up the cost of housing and groceries. She owns all of these failures, and she lied for nearly 4 years about Biden's mental capacity, saddling the nation with a president who cannot do the job. He goes on, "President Trump and I are ready to save America. Whoever's at the top of the Democratic ticket, bring it on." In contrast, former President Barack Obama said this: "Joe Biden has been one of America's most consequential presidents, as well as a dear friend and partner to me. Today, we've also been reminded again that he's a patriot of the highest order. We will be navigating uncharted waters in the days ahead, but I have extraordinary confidence that the leaders of our party will be able to create a process from which an outstanding nominee emerges. Interestingly, not endorsing Kamala Harris at the moment. What about former US President Bill Clinton and his wife, former Secretary of State Hillary? We join millions of Americans in thanking President Biden for all he has accomplished, standing up for America time and again, with his North Star always being what's best for the country. We are honored to join the President in endorsing Vice President Harris, and will do whatever we can to support her. Now, a key figure in all this, former US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, said this: President Joe Biden is a patriotic American who has always put our country first. His legacy of vision, values, and leadership make him one of the most consequential presidents in American history. With love and gratitude to President Biden for always believing in the promise of America and giving people the opportunity to reach their fulfillment. God bless America with Joe Biden's greatness and goodness. That is a key figure in urging President Biden to stand down there, Nancy Pelosi. What about Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer said, I respect President Biden's decision and I look forward to us working together during the remainder of his presidency. I know that, as he has done throughout his remarkable career, President Biden will have made his decision based on what he believes is in the best interests of the American people. Former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said on X, working with Joe Biden saw firsthand his love for America and dedication to service. Our partnership has led to significant achievements, including AUKUS, that's the pact between Australia, the US and the UK, steadfast support for Israel and joint efforts in defending our people from Houthi threats. And he went on to say, I wish him all the best. I just got a statement as well from Hunter Biden here, saying that for my entire life, I've looked at my dad in awe. How could he suffer so much heartache and yet give so much of whatever remained of his heart to others, not only in the policies he passed, but in the individual lives he's touched. Over a lifetime, I've witnessed him absorb the pain of countless everyday Americans who he's given his personal phone number to because he wanted them to call him when they were hurting, when their last hopes were slipping through their hands. That unconditional love has been his North Star as a president, and as a parent, he is unique in public life today in that there is no distance between Joe Biden, the man, and Joe Biden, the public servant of the last 54 years. And he goes on, I'm so lucky every night I get to tell him I love him and to thank him. I ask all Americans to join me tonight in doing the same. Thank you, Mr. President. I love you, Dad. That the latest in a long line of statements we have had in reaction to all this. That one from Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son. And there's also been many other tributes to Joe Biden, but equally those responses from the leadership of the Republicans, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, who are very critical of Joe Biden. Let's speak to Martha Kellner, who's in Los Angeles. And, well, Martha, this could all move very quickly, couldn't it, in terms of Kamala Harris and what happens next?
Yeah, and I think it's within the Democratic Party's interest that this does happen quite quickly. President Biden it's the longest that there's ever been that a sitting president has dropped out of the race. Apologies. It's the latest that this has happened. So it's in the Democratic Party's interest that they have an heir apparent assume that position as the presidential nominee as soon as possible. And it could happen very quickly indeed. I think it's interesting that so far no major donors have rallied around a candidate, an alternate candidate to Kamala Harris. And as I was saying earlier, logistically, she makes a lot of sense, not only because she has the Biden-Harris infrastructure around her, but that she can immediately inherit those tens of millions of dollars in campaign donations that they've so successfully raised as a pair. So if no alternative emerges, then Kamala Harris could assume that position as the Democratic Party's nominee very quickly indeed. Interestingly, I wonder if it might be better for her in terms of how she looks to the general electorate if she were to go through an open nomination process. It's something that we know that the former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi favours. So potentially Kamala Harris could fare better if she's seen as having prevailed in an open process rather than just being smiled upon kindly by President Biden.
Martha, thank you very much indeed. Joining me now is Nicole Brunner-Schmidt, a Democrat strategist who is here in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for being with us. And I want to talk about what happens next, or what you think should happen next, in just a moment. First of all, what do you make of President Biden's decision?
I mean, look, this was the decision that was rumored to be happening today for a while. There were obviously some leaked donor calls from Friday that alluded to this. I don't think it comes as a surprise. I think there are a lot of people within the Democratic Party who are very happy to be out of what we sort of call a purgatory. This is will he, won't he? It's a forward motion. The decision has been made. It's not unexpected. A lot of big donors were sort of demanding it, so it's not a huge surprise. And, you know, following his statement, he endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. We've seen a number of organizations that are extremely important within the Democratic organizational apparatus immediately follow suit, saying we're behind her. So it's really a movement to make sure that there's not a contentious situation at convention in Chicago, that this is the forward moment and movement of the Democratic Party, and this is where we're going to get behind.
But could not a competition and a race and a process with some element of a contest, could that not be good for the Democrats? Could that not energize the Democrat campaign?
I don't think it would be at this point. We are a month from convention. We are not long from the actual election. That is something that I believe is absolutely something that is positive for a party when it is earlier on in an election cycle. Had this been a decision that the president had made in January, 1,000%. Should have been a situation where the voters could go to the polls in their primaries and have that vote. But they voted for a Biden-Harris ticket. The president has decided he's going to step aside. It's a very natural progression for the VP that they also cast a vote for, because we run as a ticket to become the nominee. And I don't think it would help the Democratic Party to have a contentious fight come convention in August, when our ultimate goal is to make sure that Donald Trump, who lied throughout a debate, continued to, throughout his convention, tell a lot of misinformations and lies, become president. Our goal is to make sure that doesn't happen.
Right, I just wonder whether Kamala Harris might herself feel that she would have more legitimacy if she took part in some sort of process.
I mean, I don't think so at this point. Again, it's a timing situation. If this was January or February, that seems like a conversation to have, but we are July 21. Our convention starts August 19th. This is a ticket that people voted for. They did not just vote for Joe Biden. They voted for a Biden-Harris ticket, which means she is number 2 and a heartbeat away from the presidency. And it feels that Democrats need to unite behind somebody and move forward with an agenda and a message about why Donald Trump is not right to lead our country, and Democrats are under Vice President Harris. So it does seem like that's the smartest thing for the Democrats to do, and where organizations and whatnot are falling behind. I am sure there will be people within the party who weigh in and say there should be some sort of debate and process, but it feels unfortunate that that would be a debate that we would have again in public, the way we just had the one about President Biden. Instead of having it within the family, we're having it in front of the whole world.
Right, but you are literally the Democratic Party. This just doesn't sound very democratic.
But again, they voted for the ticket. This is a ticket that they voted for. This is the ticket that they said they were going to support. And people are not without the right to say, hey, I want to jump in, I want to try. So we'll see. We'll see where people fall. There are a lot of people, a lot of names, a lot of amazing Democratic electeds who clearly have an interest in being president of the United States. They're more than welcome to throw their name in and their hat in the ring and have a conversation with the voters and the donors and see where that lands. But it probably ends up that it's better if we are united and a unity ticket, and we go ahead and make sure that the most important thing happens, which is that Donald Trump is not elected president again for 4 years in this country.
We've just been talking about the polls, the latest polls from the swing states and so forth, and they don't look good. What is interesting is that Kamala Harris, a poll I saw yesterday, Kamala Harris is 2 points behind Donald Trump in a sort of head-to-head matchup, as was, I should say now, Joe Biden, 2 points. So there's not much difference there, but there is this polling deficit in the swing states. How worried are you about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that the polling has not been on our side right now. I think it's a shame that the administration did not spend some time of the past 4 years really introducing the vice president to the American public. There are a lot of people who truly believe she is a really super lefty from San Francisco, which could not be further from the truth of her politics. So this is a time for America to get to know really who she is, what she is about, why she should be the person to lead this country for the next 4 years. And that's the case that we're going to make over the next few weeks and at convention and until November to the American public. This is the person who is ready to make sure that the American economy is going to be strong, that you are going to be able to support your family, send your kids to a good school, have a vacation, have working people, have jobs. That's what she's going to make the case for. And she's going to make some of that case as she was part of the last administration. And she's going to share with the American public what her vision is for the next 4 years.
Nicole, thank you very much indeed. And now usually on Sky News is around this time, we look at the papers. So let's do that. Let's look at how the British newspapers are handling this story, and let's look at tomorrow's editions. And the Metro has the rather simple headline, Biden bows out. The Guardian's splash is also, it gets straight to the point really. Biden quits the race. The Telegraph has an identical headline. The Eye says White House staff had no idea that the announcement was coming, which is quite an interesting take on the whole story. The Times highlights the enormous amount of pressure the president has been facing from within his own party to withdraw from the election. The FT points out that Mr. Biden has endorsed his Vice President Kamala Harris as his successor. Look at the Mail. The Mail suggests that Kamala Harris's selection as the Democratic nominee may not be a foregone conclusion, as a number of Democrats even have been saying on this program. And the Express pictures Mr. Biden in what looks like, well, he's either asleep or in deep thought. And the Star adopts a predictably humorous tone. Their front page reads, "Sleepy Joe, it's time for a nap." Well, the president's resignation is, well, we've just done that, is dominating tomorrow's, we've just done that, haven't we? I don't know, I'm just reading something that we've already done. It's late there, even if it's not here. So, James, look, let's talk about this. It's, first of all, let's put it in perspective. I mean, this is a historic day and a significant day.
Hugely significant, Mark, in terms of the political landscape, the political ecosystem here, and the political direction for the United States. I was in Milwaukee in the last few days at the Republican National Convention. On the one hand, you have Donald Trump, former real estate agent, the man who styles himself as King of Manhattan, showbiz figures, TV celebrity. On the closing day of that, you had him on stage, introduced by an entertainment wrestler, Hulk Hogan, no less. And there was almost a religious air around this man. Largely, of course, because he had been shot. That fed into the kind of atmosphere. But there was a real air of reverence and awe amongst that crowd. And it almost felt like St. Donald at times. So that's on the one hand. On the other, you have Joe Biden, one of the most established figures in US political history, not just having been president, who is closeted away, suffering from COVID, self-isolating in his beach house. We haven't seen him for several days, has been at the heart of this Shakespearean tragedy for several weeks, having been deemed unfit for office, having collapsed in debate, and simply viewed by his party and others as too old. The man who wouldn't budge, the King Canute of politics, who resisted all entreaties until the likes of George Clooney, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, and finally, Nancy Pelosi, icon of the Democratic Party. That was his A2 Nancy in this Shakespearean tragedy. Ultimately, with that kind of clout lined up against him, those kind of opinion formers, he had nowhere to go. And the way he's done it, I think, is entirely in keeping with how strange all of this is. You would have thought the 46th President of the United States might address the nation at a time like this, not through social media on a Sunday morning. It's a thrown together
it does seem like that, doesn't it? Which raises the question about how this has all happened, about what's been going on in Delaware at his home. And this reporting that we're hearing in one of the British newspapers, certainly, that the White House staff had no idea that he was going to announce this. Now, I find that very difficult to believe on one hand, but then on the other, if the Bidens were as isolated, and it seemed to be, largely down to their family, the family, if they were as isolated as that, then perhaps not so surprising.
Yeah, Joe Biden has been surrounded by this inner circle of close colleagues. We're led to believe that those close colleagues, around 3 or 4, his wife, Dr. Joe Biden, clearly key among them, they were together in Rehoboth. He's self-isolating. Yesterday morning, Saturday morning, was when it began to come together. But he has very much been isolated from the party at large, a growing number of them. I mean, nearly 40 who have gone public. There are dozens more who have been leaning on that door and leaning on Nancy Pelosi. She's been key in all of this. Having spoken to Democrats who'd come out publicly, they said that she led the way in terms of confronting Biden with the reality, cutting through that inner circle to lay before him the polling, private polling that showed where he stood against Donald Trump, but also showed him where Kamala Harris sat against Donald Trump. That did it for him in the end, but also the donors. Through all the arguing about which poll mattered and which didn't, who was going to win and who wouldn't, the donors freezing their donations, that came down to hard dollars, nickels and dimes. There was no argument about that.
So you think the money dried up, or was threatening to dry up?
The money was being frozen by many donors, and he was staring down the barrel of a campaign that was already failing, but one that was losing money. And there's no turning back from that in an American election.
And just one last point. Do you expect him then to return to the White House, speak from the White House, and I mean, how will this happen? What will the choreography of this be?
Yeah, I think and he has said that he will address the nation at a later date. I think, you know, he's suffering from COVID. I mean, who knows? He might be in his bedroom.
Netanyahu's arriving, isn't he? Tonight or tomorrow?
Well, he's due to meet Netanyahu on Tuesday. Right. Netanyahu addresses Congress on Wednesday. I have to say, my instinct would have been that he would leave the Netanyahu thing, carry on with that, and then make the announcement afterwards. He would not want to give Netanyahu friend turned foe. He wouldn't want to give Netanyahu the satisfaction of a defunct president. Yeah. So my guess is that he'll meet Netanyahu. That will carry on because he still needs to prove himself that he has the stature and wherewithal to continue on with president.
Absolutely.
The Middle East at the very top of his priority list.
Well, 6 months. I mean, January, effectively, isn't it?
Yeah, and the Republicans will say, well, hang on a minute, why are you missing Netanyahu? You're not fit to be a candidate. Yeah. And yet you're steering the course of the Middle East conflict right down to a face-to-face meeting with Netanyahu. Okay. You'll hear that from the Republicans in grand style the next few days.
Okay. James, for now, thanks very much indeed. Well, we saw the British newspapers, what the UK newspapers are thinking of it. Let's talk to some of the journalists now. Associate editor and columnist for the Financial Times, Stephen Bush joins us, and also the Spectator's economics editor, Kate Andrews. And thank you so much for being with us. And this is not a traditional paper review, as I'm sure you'll imagine, but I do want to get your views. First of all, Stephen, what do you make of it all?
Well, it's remarkable, isn't it, really, just the timing, watching a presidential party have to navigate the kind of situation which is very common if you're a parliamentary party, where the legislators get panicked and they call for a change of leader, but in a time when they can't do a full primary with the election, a very far away in terms of how long, you could fit the whole UK election campaign twice over in the time between now and election day, but in the context of American elections, it's a very short amount of time. So it's a fascinating story organisationally, and one, of course, with huge consequences and repercussions for all of us here in Europe. I mean, in many ways, this election is much more consequential for most people in the United Kingdom than the election we just had, or indeed the next election we'll have.
Yeah, and I want to talk about what sort of process you think will or should take place. Kate, just your initial thoughts on this moment in American politics.
Remarkable, historically unprecedented. You have had presidents that have decided not to stand for another term, but by no means so close to the election. As Stephen points out, in American terms, we are now very close to the election, and you've had 50 states of Democratic primaries where people have largely voted for the Biden-Harris ticket. This puts the Democratic National Convention in a really tricky place because, of course, the Democrats want to be able to say they are going up against a candidate who rejects the Democratic results of the previous election. But they have a primary process of their own, and I think not just Joe Biden's endorsement of the Vice President Kamala Harris tonight, but also that primary process puts her in a very strong position to be the next nominee.
Stephen, do you think it is a necessity to have a competitive process?
No, I mean, for two reasons. One, for all of the reasons that Kate just outlined. They do have a regular competitive process. It's called the primaries, in which the Biden-Harris ticket was picked by 14 million Democrats. But also, the Democratic Party, and indeed no political party in the United States, really has a mechanism to select a presidential candidate without a full primary process. That process takes many, many months. There is not enough time between now and when early voting starts in 58 days to have that process. So the only people who can pick a new candidate will be the 3,900 or so convention delegates who are pledged to Joe Biden. They are ultimately only ever going to pick Kamala Harris. So in some ways, it doesn't really matter what process the Democratic Party chooses. It's really hard to see, unless Kamala Harris tomorrow decides to eat a baby, how it won't be her. And so the question for them is, I think, just as simple as, what is the least damaging way for Harris to become the presidential nominee? I think we'll see over the next couple of days various grandees coming out in favor of her. I know some of the papers are suggesting that Obama's withheld endorsement is a sign that he hopes for an open primary, but to be honest, I think it's much more likely than what we'll see as a drip, drip, drip of American grandees coming out and going, of course it should be Kamala, because they will want to avoid a process that will be very messy on TV, but one which, even if you're someone who doesn't think Harris is the best plausible available candidate, you know that there is no mechanism to get a candidate not called Kamala Harris as presidential candidate.
Yeah, Stephen, Kate, if you could hold on for a second, because we've got to talk to Joe Walsh, who is a former Republican congressman and presidential candidate. Joe Walsh, thank you very much for being with us. So are you at all surprised in how this has turned out this weekend?
No, not at all. We live in unprecedented times. The Republican nominee for president is somebody who tried to overthrow an American election 3.5 years ago. He's now the Republican nominee again. The Democratic nominee is old. And Joe Biden has had a very successful first term, but he couldn't make the case that he was able to do his job for another 4 years. And it's all about beating Donald Trump, putting up the strongest Democrat who can do that.
How worried do you think Donald Trump will be by this turn of events?
I think he's scared to death for a couple reasons. Trump is a bully. He's a coward, but he's always had trouble with strong women. He always struggled with Nancy Pelosi. I think that scares him. Look, the whole campaign has been banking on running against Joe Biden. They built their entire campaign to run against 81-year-old Joe Biden. They tried to keep Biden in the race. Kamala Harris is a wild card. So I think they're going to struggle immensely to run against her.
Do you think he will worry about having to debate, if he agrees to a debate, against Kamala Harris?
Yeah, I'd be really surprised if he did debate her. Again, so much of this is aesthetics and communications. Biden had a very successful first term. He's incapable of communicating that anymore, and we saw that at the debate. Kamala Harris is a strong debater. She's a prosecutor. I can't emphasize this enough. America did not want the Biden-Trump matchup. America really doesn't want these two guys. You throw any new candidate into that mix, like Kamala Harris, we're going to see huge enthusiasm, I think, in this country.
In one sense, though, I suppose you could argue, the Republicans would argue, or some Republicans would argue, that after their convention in Milwaukee, that is a united party. And, I mean, Donald Trump runs that party.
Completely.
And my other point would be that they are leading in many of the swing states.
Yes, completely. Donald Trump is winning right now. And my former party, the Republican Party, is completely unified right now. And the Democratic Party is divided. The hope is, right, that a new candidate will unite that party. The other thing we know in America is, as enthusiastic as Trump's supporters are, there are more people in this country who oppose Trump than support him. They just need a reason to be excited and enthused. Biden didn't give that to them. I think Kamala Harris will.
Do you think there should be some sort of process, or do you think it's a question of it will be in the Democrats' best interest to kind of endorse Kamala Harris and get on with the campaign? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there will be a process. What did Kamala Harris say today? Kamala Harris today said, I'm honored and I'm going to earn the nomination. So Kamala Harris threw her hat into the ring. Any other Democrat is welcome to throw their hat into the ring. I don't think they will, though. The delegates at the convention will decide who the nominee is. Any other Democrat can get in, but I think there's going to be real unification behind Kamala Harris.
Joe Walsh, appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. Quick look at the clock, and it is, well, it's just turned 11 o'clock in the UK, and you are watching Sky News. I'm Mark Austin, live from Washington this evening on a momentous day that will certainly reshape the battle for the US presidency in November, and could also, of course, have this decisive impact on the future of the most powerful country on earth.